I grew up in a quiet neighborhood just outside a small town in Ohio. The kind of place where nothing ever really happens. Tree-lined streets, old wooden houses, kids riding bikes until the streetlights came on. And behind my house, there was a massive stretch of woods. Everyone called it Miller's Forest, but nobody actually knew who Miller was. My backyard basically ended where the forest began. Just a rusted chain-link fence and then miles of dark trees. When I was a kid, that forest always felt wrong. You know how sometimes a place just gives you that weird gut feeling? Like something's watching you? Yeah, that was Miller's Forest. But I never told anyone that. Because kids imagine things, right? At least that's what my parents always said. The first weird thing. I was around 14 years old when it started. One summer night, I was laying in bed scrolling on my phone when I heard something outside. A noise. Not loud, but definitely there. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Like someone slowly walking across dry leaves. At first, I thought it was just a raccoon or something. Our trash cans were always getting knocked over. But then I realized something weird. The footsteps sounded too slow. Animals don't walk like that. They scurry. They move fast. This was different. It sounded like someone pacing, back and forth, right near the fence. I sat up in bed and listened. Crunch, 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 every few seconds. Slow, deliberate. My bedroom window faced the backyard. And for a minute, I just stared at the curtains, trying to decide if I should look. You know that feeling when you're scared to check something, because part of you thinks you might actually see something? Yeah, that, but curiosity won. So I slowly got up, pulled the curtain back, and looked outside. At first I didn't see anything, just the backyard, the old swing set, the wooden shed, and the fence at the edge of the yard. Then my eyes adjusted, and I noticed something standing right next to the fence. A person, tall, completely still, just standing there, staring toward the house. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought it might be one of my neighbors. But then I realized something. They were standing on the forest side of the fence, inside the woods, and they weren't moving, not even a little, just standing there in the dark, watching. I told my dad. I ran downstairs and woke my dad up. Dad, there's someone outside. He groaned and rubbed his eyes. What? In the woods, behind the fence. He grabbed a flashlight and walked outside with me. The night air was cool and quiet. Crickets chirping, leaves rustling. Totally normal. But when we reached the backyard fence, there was nobody there. My dad shined the flashlight into the trees. Nothing, just woods. You probably saw a deer, he said. But I knew what I saw. That wasn't a deer. That was a person. And they were staring directly at my window. The second night, 2 nights later, it happened again. This time I heard the footsteps earlier, around midnight. Same exact sound. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Slow, heavy, walking back and forth behind the fence. I didn't even bother checking the window right away, because I already knew someone was out there. After about 5 minutes, I worked up the nerve to look again. I moved the curtain slightly, just enough to see outside, and there they were, standing in almost the exact same spot as before. Tall, skinny, completely still, but something was different this time. They were closer to the fence, like really close, so close I could almost see their face, except I couldn't, because their head was tilted slightly downward, and their face was hidden in shadow. I watched them for maybe 30 seconds, and they didn't move, not even once. Then suddenly, their heads slowly lifted, like they knew I was watching. And I swear to God, it felt like they were looking directly into my room, right at me. That's when I slammed the curtain shut. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might pass out. The backyard footprints. The next morning, my dad checked the yard, and this time, he found something. Footprints, right near the fence. Big ones, like size 12 or 13. And they were barefoot. That creeped him out instantly, because who walks through a forest barefoot at night? But the weirdest part? The footprints didn't go away from the fence. They only went toward it, Like whoever made them came from the woods, walked to the fence, and then disappeared. Things get worse. For the next week, things got really weird. The footsteps kept happening, almost every night, always around the same time, always slow, always near the fence. But the person never came into the yard. They just stayed in the woods, watching, waiting. Then one night something happened that made everything way worse. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound that instantly made my skin crawl. Knocking, not on the door, not on the window, but on the fence. Clang, 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 slow metal tapping, like someone hitting the chain-link fence with a rock. I looked outside, and this time, they weren't just standing there. They were pacing along the fence, back and forth, dragging something along the metal, making that horrible scraping sound. And that's when I finally saw their face, or at least part of it, pale, way too pale, and smiling. The police get involved. After that night, my parents called the police. 2 officers came and searched the woods. They walked around with flashlights for almost an hour, but they didn't find anyone. No camp, no belongings, nothing, just forest. Before they left, one of the officers said something weird. He asked my dad if we had security cameras. We didn't, so he recommended installing some. Just in case, he said. That phrase stuck with me. Just in case what? The camera footage. A few days later, we installed cameras in the backyard, one pointing directly at the fence. The first 2 nights, nothing happened. No footsteps, no figure, no movement at all. It was like whoever had been out there knew. Then on the 3rd night, the camera caught something, and what we saw still freaks me out to this day. At exactly 2:17 a.m., a figure stepped out of the woods. Tall, extremely skinny, completely naked, and barefoot. They walked right up to the fence, then stood there, staring directly at the house, for almost 10 minutes, not moving, not blinking, just staring. Then slowly, they lifted their head and looked directly into the camera and smiled. I live in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody. Nothing crazy ever really happens here. No big crimes. No weird disappearances. Just quiet streets, old houses, and backyards that stretch out into patches of woods. My backyard is pretty big. There's a wooden fence, a small shed, and a huge oak tree in the middle of the yard. Behind the fence is just thick woods. Nobody owns that land anymore. At least, that's what people say. And for most of my life, nothing weird ever happened back there. Until about 2 months ago. The first night. It started around 3 a.m. I woke up to a weird noise outside. At first, I thought it was just wind. But then I heard it again. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It sounded like metal dragging against dirt. Like someone was digging. My bedroom window faces the backyard, so I got up and looked outside. Everything was dark. The yard light barely lit anything past the oak tree, but I could still hear it. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Someone was definitely digging, and they were doing it inside my yard. My first thought was maybe a raccoon or a dog, but animals don't use shovels. And this sound? It sounded exactly like a shovel hitting dirt. I checked the yard. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Then I walked to the back door. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would you go outside? Honestly, I don't know. Curiosity gets the best of you sometimes. I opened the door slowly. The night air was cold and quiet, and the digging sound had stopped. Completely. The backyard looked normal. Nothing moving. Nothing out of place. I walked toward the oak tree, and that's when I saw it. A small pile of fresh dirt, right next to the tree, like someone had started digging a hole and then stopped. I stood there for a minute, looking around, but there was nobody there. No footprints, no tools, nothing. So eventually I went back inside, but something about it felt really wrong. The second night, the next night it happened again. Same exact time. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the same sound. Scrape, scrape, scrape. But this time it sounded closer to the house, like whoever was digging had moved locations. I slowly walked to the window and peeked outside, and that's when I saw something moving near the shed. A figure, bent over, digging. At first, I thought it might be a neighbor or something. Maybe someone drunk messing around. But then the person stood up, and I immediately realized something was very wrong. They were extremely tall, way taller than a normal person, and they looked unbelievably skinny, like their arms were too long for their body. They held a shovel, and they were digging holes all over my yard, just randomly digging, then filling them back in, then digging another one, over and over again, like they were searching for something. The worst part, I kept watching from the window. My heart was racing, and suddenly the person stopped digging. They just froze, standing perfectly still. Then slowly, they turned their head and looked directly at my window. I instantly ducked down. My stomach dropped. There was no way they could see me. My room was dark, but something about the way they turned felt deliberate, like they knew someone was watching. I stayed on the floor for a full minute, then slowly peeked back up. The yard was empty. The person was gone. The holes. The next morning I went outside to check, and my entire backyard looked like someone had attacked it with a shovel. There were holes everywhere, near the fence, near the shed, near the oak tree, at least 15 different holes, all about 2 feet deep, and every single one had been filled back in, like whoever dug them didn't want anyone to know. That's when I decided to check the security camera, the camera footage. We have a small camera facing the backyard. I pulled up the footage from the night before. At first, everything looked normal. The yard was empty, nothing moving. Then at 2:58 a.m., something stepped into the frame, and I instantly felt my stomach twist. It was the same figure, but the camera made things way clearer. The person wasn't wearing any clothes. They were completely naked. Their skin looked almost gray, and their body was unbelievably thin, like you could see every bone. But the creepiest part, their movements. They moved in this weird jerky way, like their body didn't bend normally. They dug hole after hole after hole for almost 2 hours. Then around 4:12 a.m. something happened that made my blood run cold. The figure suddenly stopped digging and slowly turned toward the camera, then walked right up to it, so close their face filled the screen, and they just stared into the lens for almost 20 seconds. Not blinking, not moving, just staring. Then they leaned forward and whispered something. The camera didn't record audio well, but I could read their lips. And I swear to God, they said, "Almost found it." Then they smiled and walked back into the woods. The last night, after that I called the police. They searched the woods behind my house. They didn't find anyone. No camps, no footprints, nothing. But the officer said something that stuck with me. He asked if anyone had buried anything in my backyard before. I told him no, at least not that I knew of. 3 nights later, the digging started again. But this time, it wasn't in the backyard. It was right outside my house, under my bedroom window. And whatever was digging was much closer than before. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood in northern Michigan, the kind of place where nothing interesting ever happens. Just small houses, long gravel driveways, and huge backyards that stretch into patches of forest. Most of the houses were built in the 70s, and almost every property had an old shed, a rusted swing set, or some forgotten piece of junk sitting behind the house. My backyard was massive. There was a wooden fence on one side, thick woods behind it, and an old concrete slab near the back corner, where a shed used to be before we moved in. My parents always said the previous owners tore the shed down because it was falling apart, so the slab just sat there for years, cracked, covered in weeds, completely useless. For most of my life, I never thought anything about it, until the night I heard something knocking from underneath it. I was 16 when it started. One night around 2 a.m., I woke up to a weird sound outside my window. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe a branch hitting something in the yard. But then I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. It was slow, dull, like someone tapping on wood or hollow metal. My bedroom window faced the backyard, so I leaned over and looked outside. The yard light lit up the grass and part of the fence, but the rest of the yard disappeared into darkness. Everything looked normal. Then the knocking happened again. Knock, knock, knock. That's when I realized something that made my stomach twist. The sound was coming from the concrete slab, which didn't make sense. Concrete doesn't make hollow knocking sounds unless there's empty space underneath it. The next morning I went outside to check it out. The slab looked the same as always. Old, cracked, weeds growing around the edges. But when I stepped on it, something fell off. The middle sounded hollow, like there was a space under it. I told my dad about it, but he just laughed and said it was probably an old septic cover or something from before the house was built. He told me not to worry about it, so I tried to forget about it. But the knocking kept happening, every night around the same time, usually between 1:30 and 3 a.m. Knock, 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 slow, rhythmic, almost like someone was trying to get attention. After a few nights, it started to feel less like random noise and more like something deliberate, like someone was actually down there. One night, I decided I was going to stay awake and watch the backyard. I turned off the lights in my room and sat by the window around 1:45 a.m. At first, nothing happened. The yard was completely still. The trees barely moved. The air looked thick and dark beyond the fence. Then the knocking started again. Knock, knock, knock. And this time something else happened. The slab moved, just slightly, like something underneath. It was pushing upward. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear in my ears. Slowly, one corner of the slab lifted up just enough for something to slide out. The first thing I saw was a hand. A pale hand with long, dirty fingers and black fingernails. It gripped the edge of the slab and pushed it upward. Then a man crawled out. I froze. He looked completely wrong. His skin was grayish and pale like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. His hair was long and tangled, hanging over his face. His beard was thick and messy, and his body was unbelievably thin, like you could see every bone through his skin. He slowly crawled out from under the slab and stood up. For a few seconds, he just stretched his arms like someone waking up from a long sleep. Then he started walking around my backyard, slowly, looking at everything. The fence, the trees, the house, the shed, like he was checking his surroundings. Then he looked up at my window. I instantly dropped to the floor. My heart was racing, so hard I thought he could hear it. I stayed on the floor for at least 5 minutes, barely breathing. When I finally looked back out the window, the yard was empty. The slab was flat again, like nothing had happened. The next morning, I told my parents everything. They didn't believe me. They thought I had a nightmare or imagined it because I stayed up too late. But I kept insisting someone was living under the slab. Eventually, my dad grabbed a crowbar and went outside to check. He tried to lift the slab. It didn't move, not even a little. It looked completely solid. No cracks big enough to open. No holes. No tunnels. Nothing. So they told me to stop worrying about it. But the knocking continued every night. And a few days later, I found something that proved I wasn't crazy. Footprints. Bare footprints in the dirt behind the slab. Big ones. Definitely a grown man's feet. And they led from the slab toward the fence. Then back again. That's when my parents finally got concerned. They called the police. 2 officers came that afternoon and checked the backyard. They looked at the slab, walked around the yard, shined flashlights into the woods behind the fence. But they didn't find anything. No tunnels, no camps, no sign someone had been living there. Before they left, one of the officers asked something strange. He asked my dad if the house had any old underground structures, like a bunker or storage cellar. My dad said no, but the officer looked uneasy, like he didn't fully believe that answer. A few nights later, I woke up to the loudest noise yet. Bang, bang, bang. It sounded like someone hitting metal or concrete with something heavy. I rushed to the window, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The man was standing in the backyard, holding a shovel. He was digging next to the slab, throwing dirt everywhere like he was trying to break into something buried underground. Then suddenly he stopped. He slowly turned toward the house, toward my window. Even though my room was completely dark, it felt like he could see me. He started walking closer, step by step across the grass. until he was standing directly under my window. Then he looked up and smiled, a wide, slow smile that didn't look normal at all. His lips moved like he was whispering something. I couldn't hear him through the glass, but I could read his lips clearly. He said, "You're next." After that night, we never saw him again. But a few weeks later, my dad decided to finally break the slab open just to prove nothing was there. He rented tools and smashed through the concrete. And underneath it, we found something none of us expected. A tunnel, a long, narrow tunnel, leading underground toward the woods behind the house. The tunnel didn't look new. The dirt walls were old and compact, like it had been there for years, maybe decades. And inside the tunnel, we found things buried in the dirt. Old clothes, shoes, backpacks, and objects that clearly belonged to people. People who never came back to get them. We moved out of that house 3 months later. But the one thing that still keeps me awake sometimes is this. When we left, the police sealed the tunnel entrance with concrete. But a few weeks after we moved, my dad drove by the old house one night, and he said the concrete slab in the backyard was broken again, like something had pushed its way back out.